28 years ago, a woman named Della Faye Sorrells was found on a dirt access road outside the town of Maricopa Wells, Arizona, population 3,100, leaving behind an overturned grocery bag, a set of keys still in the ignition of her Bronco, and a community that would spend the next 3 decades believing the man who did it had gotten away clean. He hadn't. Authorities at the time believed the case would be solved within months. Della Faye had lived in Maricopa Wells her whole life. She had no enemies that anyone could name. The sheriff's office worked 4 suspects in the first year, eliminated them one by one, and by 1998 had quietly reclassified the investigation as inactive pending new leads. There were none. Her mother, a woman named Eunice Sorrells, who worked the front desk at the county assessor's office for 31 years, refused to use the word cold. She told the Maricopa Wells Courier in a 2004 interview that cold was a word for cases that had given up. She had not given up. She never would. Then, in the spring of 2024, a DNA profile that had sat in the Arizona Department of Public Safety's forensic database for 6 years without a match suddenly found one. Attached to a man who had attended Della Faye's funeral, who had helped organize the community search in the days after her disappearance, and who had lived 8 blocks from her house for every one of the 28 years in between. The arrest did not just shock Maricopa Wells, it remade everything people thought they knew about the place. But to understand what that now revealed, and why it took 28 years for the match to arrive, we have to go back to the summer of 1996. Because to understand what was taken from this community, you first have to understand who Della Faye Sorrells was. Maricopa Wells, in the summer of 1996, sat in the broad, flat basin south of Phoenix, in country that the heat owned from May through September, without apology. The sky stayed white at midday, and the creosote along the roadsides held its smell in the dry air, and the evenings came slow and copper-colored, and people sat on their front porches and waited for a breeze that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. It was the kind of desert town that outsiders drove through, and insiders never quite managed to leave, held in place by the particular gravity of a place where the people knew your name before you had to say it. Della Faye Sorrells was 38 years old, a 3rd-grade teacher at Maricopa Wells Elementary for 11 years, and the kind of teacher whose former students, now in their 20s and 30s, still stopped her in the parking lot of the Fry's grocery store to tell her what she had meant to them. She taught reading with an insistence that bordered on personal offense at the idea that any child in her classroom would leave without the skill, and she had a reputation for staying after school 3 days a week with the children who needed more time, without ever making those children feel that needing more time was anything other than ordinary. Her principal had tried to nominate her for the state teaching award twice. Both times Della Faye had asked him not to. She was the younger of 2 daughters. Her older sister Renata lived in Tucson and drove up twice a month for Sunday dinner at Eunice's house, the 3 of them around the same kitchen table where Della Faye and Renata had done their homework growing up. She had a border collie named Biscochito, Bisco for short, who she walked every morning before school along the canal road behind her neighborhood, a habit she had kept for 7 years without exception. One other detail that people who knew her mentioned consistently: Della Faye kept a paper grocery list folded in her wallet at all times, updated every Sunday evening, because she shopped on the way home from school on Thursdays and did not trust herself to remember what she needed without it. It was a small, deliberate habit. It was the kind of detail that stays with people after everything else has gone to grief. She had driven to the Fry's on Thursday, July 18th, 1996. The same as she always did. She never made it home. The Fry's security camera at the Maricopa Wells location showed Della Faye Sorrells pushing a cart through the checkout lane at 5:47 p.m. on July 18, 1996. She paid by check. The checkout clerk, a teenager named Danny Ruiz, remembered her as always friendly. Always asked how school was going even when it was summer, as if she was constitutionally unable to turn the habit off. The timestamp on the register receipt was 5:52 p.m. at 7:11 p.m. A ranch hand named Cody Ariola driving home on the Thornberry Access Road, a dirt track that ran along the back edge of the Sorrells' property and connected two county roads about 1.5 miles from the Fries, came around a bend and saw a white Bronco stopped at an angle across the road with the driver's door hanging open. He stopped. He got out. The Bronco's engine was running. The radio was on. A country station. Low. On the road beside the open door was a paper grocery bag lying on its side, its contents scattered. A box of pasta, a can of diced tomatoes, a bunch of cilantro, a carton of orange juice that had rolled 10 feet and come to rest against the front tire. Cody Ariola did not touch anything. He got back in his truck. He called the Maricopa Wells Sheriff's Substation from a payphone at the intersection of Thornberry Road and County Route 8 at 7:19 p.m. Deputies arrived at 7:38 p.m. By 8:00 p.m., the lead duty officer had established a perimeter. By 9:30 p.m., the sheriff himself was on scene. The keys were in the Bronco's ignition. Della Faye's purse was on the passenger seat. Her paper grocery list, the one she kept folded in her wallet, was on the floor of the passenger side, half unfolded, as if she had pulled it out to check something against what was in the bag before she stopped. She was not there. In the ditch on the south side of the access road, 14 feet from the Bronco's front bumper, investigators found a single sandal. Women's size 7. The strap had been broken, the kind of break consistent with force. The sandal's pair was never found. It was bagged and tagged. Item number 6. On a fence post at the east edge of the access road, one of the deputies noticed something that was logged in the incident report, but not specifically analyzed. A small smear of blood on the weathered wood, at approximately shoulder height for a person of average build. A swab was taken. It was stored with the rest of the biological evidence at the DP's forensic lab in Phoenix. Nobody thought much of the fence post at the time. It was a working ranch road. Things bled on fence posts. That swab would become the most important object in the case. The lead detective assigned to the Della Faye Sorrells case was Detective Sergeant Irene Salcedo of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, 44 years old, 18 years on the job. A woman who had grown up in the valley and who understood the particular physics of small community investigations, where the suspect pool was also the witness pool, was also the search party. It was the kind of case where the people helping you look could be the person you were looking for, and Salcedo had learned over nearly 2 decades to hold both possibilities at once without letting either one close her eyes. She worked 4 suspects in the first 14 months. The first was a former boyfriend from Della Faye's early 20s, a man who had moved to Flagstaff in 1991 but had been in the Phoenix area the week of her disappearance on a work contract. He was interviewed twice, provided an alibi that checked out through hotel records and a coworker's testimony, and was eliminated by November of 1996. The second was a man who had been seen driving slowly past Della Faye's house 3 times in the week before she disappeared, noted by a neighbor named Fran Kowalski. The man turned out to be a real estate investor doing casual neighborhood assessments, an odd practice, as Salcedo noted in her file, but not a criminal one. He had been in California on the 18th. The third suspect gave Salcedo 7 months of concentrated attention. His name was not released publicly at the time and remains sealed in the case record. What can be said is that he lived 3 streets from Della Faye, that he had no alibi for the evening of July 18th that could be independently corroborated, and that a witness described seeing a vehicle matching his parked near the Thornbury Access Road earlier that afternoon. The witness was not certain of the date. The match on the vehicle description was partial. Without physical evidence tying this man to the scene, and with his attorney's cooperation producing enough documentation of his general whereabouts to raise reasonable doubt, Salcedo could not bring the case forward. She filed a memo stating her concerns. She was told the case would remain active. It did not remain active in any functional sense of the word. Eunice Sorrells called the sheriff's office every 3 months for the first 5 years, then every 6 months for the next 5. She was always polite. She always identified herself by name and asked to speak to the detective of record. She was always told there were no new developments. She thanked whoever she spoke to and hung up and called Renata, and they talked until one of them needed to stop. Irene Salcedo retired in 2009. She had kept the Sorrells case file in a manila folder in her home office for 11 years after leaving the department. When her daughter asked her once why she kept it, Salcedo said, "Because the fence post, because something was on that fence post, and nobody has ever come back to it." By 2015, 19 years had passed since Della Fey disappeared. Bisco the border collie had died in 2008, 12 years old, in the house where Eunice kept every photograph of her younger daughter that she'd ever owned, framed and unframed, and in albums and in shoeboxes, and in the order they'd always been in. The elementary school had renamed its reading corner the Della Fey Sorrells Reading Corner in 2011, a small wooden sign above the bookshelf in room 14. Handmade by a custodian named Al, who had watched her teach for 8 years and could not think of a better thing to do with his hands when she was gone. The Maricopa Wells Courier ran a piece on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance in 2016. A former student, a woman now in her 30s with children of her own, wrote a letter to the paper that ended with the sentence, "She taught me to read. I read to my kids every night. She's in the room when I do." Thomas Enright read that letter. He lived 8 blocks from Della Fey's old house. He had attended her funeral in 1998 when remains recovered from a dry wash north of the Thornbury Road were identified as hers. He had helped organize the search parties in July of 1996. He had shaken Eunice Sorrells' hand at the funeral and told her he was sorry for her loss. He read the letter and went back to his life. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Della Fey. In 2018, the Arizona Department of Public Safety submitted the biological evidence from the Della Fey Sorrells case for a comprehensive cold case NA review, part of a statewide initiative to process legacy biological samples using the generation of forensic technology that had been unavailable in 1996. The blood swab from the fence post on Thornbury Access Road was among the samples submitted. The profile generated from that swab was uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's combined DINA index system, the national database that stores DINA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and forensic evidence from unsolved cases. In the fall of 2018. The process is straightforward in principle. Upload the unknown profile, let the system search for a match among the millions of reference profiles in the database, and wait. The wait, in this case, was 6 years. On a Tuesday morning in March of 2024, Detective Carmen Ibarra of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit received an automated notification from CODIS flagging a candidate match on the Sorrells case profile. She read the alert twice. Then, she pulled the name attached to the matching reference profile. Thomas Enright. Age, 63. Maricopa Wells, Arizona. The reference profile had been entered into CODIS in 2022, following Enright's arrest on an unrelated charge, a misdemeanor assault in Tempe, that had resulted in a mandatory DNA collection under Arizona state law. The sample from 2022 had been sitting in the database for 2 years before the Sorrells profile was run against it. 2 years. The match had been available since 2022. The search had not been run against new entries since 2019. Ibarra called her supervisor. Then she called the Arizona DPS Forensic Lab to confirm the match independently. Confirmation came back in 4 days. The DNA from the fence post on Thornberry Access Road matched Thomas Enright at a statistical certainty that the forensic analyst described, in her report, as effectively irrefutable. Ibarra then pulled everything on Enright that the department had. Thomas Enright had lived in Maricopa Wells since 1991. He was 41 years old in July of 1996. He worked at that time as an irrigation systems contractor, a job that took him to properties across the South Phoenix Basin on irregular schedules, often alone, often on back roads and access tracks exactly like the Thornberry Road. His company had done work on 2 properties adjacent to land accessed by the Thornberry Road within the 18 months before Delafay's disappearance. He knew the road. He had known it for years before July 18, 1996. Ibarra called Irene Salcedo at her home in Mesa. Salcedo listened to the name. There was a long pause. Then she said, "He was at the funeral." "I know," Ibarra said. He shook her mother's hand. Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. Thomas Enright had been, for 28 years, precisely the kind of man a community like Maricopa Wells produces and trusts, and never thinks to look at twice. He had married in 2001 and raised 2 children in the same house, 8 blocks from the house where Delafay Sorrells had lived. He coached youth soccer for 4 seasons in the early 2000s. He went to the same hardware store, the same gas station, the same 4th of July celebration in the park on Central Avenue where Maricopa Wells had always held it. He was not remarkable in any way that called attention to itself. That was, as would later become evident, entirely deliberate. In the years since the case had gone cold, Thomas Enright had been interviewed once, in 1997, as part of a general neighborhood canvass, not as a suspect. He had told investigators he didn't know Delafay well, just to say hello to, the way you know everyone in a small town. He said he had been home the evening of July 18th. His wife at the time, they had since divorced, had confirmed it. The interview had lasted 12 minutes and was never followed up. Detective Ibarra obtained a warrant for Enright's arrest on April 9, 2024. She coordinated with Maricopa Wells officers, who knew the town and knew where Enright would be on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. He was at the hardware store on the main road, the same one he had been going to for 30 years, buying irrigation fittings. 2 detectives and a uniformed officer walked in at 9:14 a.m. Enright was in the 3rd aisle. He looked up when he heard the door. He knew. He did not run. He set the fittings on the shelf and turned to face them and said nothing. He was read his rights in aisle 3 of the hardware store where half the town had been buying supplies for 3 decades, and he was walked out through the front door in handcuffs past a man who recognized him and stopped in the parking lot and watched and could not find the words for what he was seeing. In Maricopa Wells, the news moved the way news moves in a small town, fast, personal, and with a particular weight that impersonal news cannot carry. People who had stood beside Thomas Enright at the search parties in 1996 sat with the knowledge that he had known, every step of that search, that they would not find her where they were looking. People who had watched him coach their children's soccer games revised those memories involuntarily and found they could not revise them back. Fran Kowalski, who had reported the car parked near Delafay's Street in 1996, a different car, a different suspect, a lead that went nowhere, said she thought about all the times she had seen Enright's truck on that same street over the years and felt nothing, assumed nothing. Because he was just a neighbor. He had always been just a neighbor. That was the part that stayed with people. Thomas Enright was charged with first-degree murder. He entered a not guilty plea. His trial is scheduled. He has made no public statement. The Dina evidence, a blood swab taken from a fence post on a dirt access road in July of 1996, stored in a forensic lab for 28 years, matched to a database entry from 2022 through a system that had not run the comparison until 2024, is the prosecution's central exhibit. Court documents confirm the match. The defense has indicated it will contest the collection and storage chain of the original 1996 sample. The prosecution has indicated it is prepared for that challenge. Delafay Sorrells was 38 years old. She kept a grocery list folded in her wallet and walked her border collie before school and stayed late 3 days a week for the children who needed more time and never wanted an award for any of it. She drove the same road home from the Fries every Thursday. She had been doing it for 11 years, and she expected to be doing it on the 18th of July, 1996, and on every Thursday after that for however long Thursday came around. She did not get those Thursdays. But the fence post remembered. The blood on the weathered wood, shoulder height, on a working ranch road in the Arizona summer heat. It waded through 28 years of evidence storage, 2 database upload cycles, and 1 mandatory Dina collection on an unrelated charge. And when the system finally ran the comparison it needed to run, it answered. Eunice Sorrells, now 81 years old, was sitting in her kitchen when Renata called with the news. She did not say she had always known. She did not say she had told them so. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she wanted to go to the reading corner in room 14 and sit there for a while. Renata drove her. They sat together in front of the small wooden sign that Al, the custodian, had made, in the room where Delafay had taught children to read for 11 years, and they didn't need to say anything to each other at all. There are things worth sitting with when a case like this resolves the way this one did. What does it mean that the evidence existed in 1996? That the answer was always on that fence post, and what it took to reach it was not better investigators, or a confession, or a lucky break, but a database that grew large enough over 28 years to finally contain the right name. How many cases from the mid-1990s are waiting for an arrest made in 2022 to work its way through a database comparison that hasn't been run yet? And what do we owe to the Eunice Sorrellses of the world, the people who call every 3 months and then every 6 months and keep the word cold out of their vocabulary for 28 years? Justice found Delafay Sorrells after 28 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long the database takes to match, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for watching.